I'm going to tell you something the Pentagon knows, but won't say publicly. A $10 million American tank, not destroyed by missiles, not by other tanks, not by fighter jets, by a drone that costs less than your iPhone, built in someone's living room. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that it happened 31 times. America has spent $8 trillion on war since 9/11. $8 trillion. You know what it won? Afghanistan fell in 11 days after 20 years of occupation. Iraq is closer to Iran today than before the invasion. Right now, Houthi rebels, a militia in one of the poorest countries on earth, successfully shut down a major global shipping lane, costing the world economy hundreds of billions, against the United States Navy. And here's the equation that explains every single one of those failures. Iran builds a drone for $400. America shoots it down with a missile that costs $4 million. Iran fires 100 of them. America just spent $400 million to stop a $40,000 attack. Now do that math. Every single day, for months, in multiple conflict zones simultaneously. This isn't a military problem. This is a financial collapse in slow motion. And America is walking into it with its eyes open. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the most expensive military in human history is losing a war it doesn't even know it's fighting.
To understand what's happening now, you have to understand what war used to mean. For most of modern history, military power came down to one thing: industrial capacity. Whoever could build the most tanks, the most ships, the most planes, won. That's why World War II was decided partly in American factories. The US wasn't just fighting, it was outproducing everyone else on the planet. And for decades after, that logic held. Big armies, big weapons, big budgets, big wins. The more you spent, the more you dominated. This is the world the US military was built for. But somewhere around the early 2000s, the rules started changing. And the US, the most powerful military force ever assembled, didn't notice fast enough. The shift started quietly. With IEDs in Iraq, roadside bombs made from fertilizer and old artillery shells, costing maybe $30, that were destroying $500,000 armored vehicles. That was 2004 $30 versus 500,000. Nobody in Washington called it a crisis. They called it an insurgency problem. They were wrong. And 20 years later, the same mistake. Bigger scale, higher cost, different desert. In the fall of 2020, Azerbaijan and Armenia went to war over a disputed territory called Nagorno-Karabakh. On paper, Armenia had the stronger ground force. Soviet-era tanks, artillery, fortified positions, a professional army. Azerbaijan had something different: Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 drones, and cheap Iranian-style loitering munitions, basically flying bombs that circle an area until they spot a target and dive into it. The war lasted 44 days. Armenian soldiers, trained, professional, fortified, were being killed by machines they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't shoot back at. One Armenian commander described it as fighting ghosts. Ghosts that cost $50,000. His tanks cost $3 million each. And the world's military analysts sat up and said, wait, this wasn't supposed to happen this way. An advanced ground force, with real training, real equipment, real fortifications, had just been defeated by a fleet of relatively cheap flying machines. The price gap was staggering. Azerbaijan's drones cost tens of thousands of dollars each. The tanks and artillery systems they were destroying cost millions. For the first time, being poor on the battlefield wasn't a death sentence. Being expensive was. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, most analysts gave Kiev weeks, maybe days, before it fell. Russia had more troops, more missiles, more aircraft, more of everything. What happened instead became the most important military lesson of the 21st century. Ukraine turned itself into a drone superpower, almost overnight. Today, Ukraine produces up to 200,000 FPV drones per month from roughly 500 domestic manufacturers. Many of these factories are literally people working in apartments and basements. Baristas, farmers, dancers, ordinary civilians assembling weapons of war. And those weapons? They cost around $400 to $500 each. Ukraine is now deploying an estimated 9,000 drones per day against Russian forces. Let that sink in. 9,000 per day. And what are those $400 drones hitting? Russian tanks worth $4 million? Russian helicopters worth $15 million. In July 2024, a single Ukrainian FPV drone operator destroyed a Russian Mi-8 helicopter. Gone. $15 million of Russian military hardware, taken out by a device you could build with parts from an electronics market. Then there was Operation Spiderweb. Ukraine smuggled 117 drones over the Russian border, launched them from trucks near Russian air bases, and in one night, caused an estimated $7 billion in damage, destroying over 40 long-range bombers. About a third of Russia's entire bomber fleet. $7 billion. From a fleet of cheap, commercially available drones. The economics of warfare had just been turned upside down. But here's where it gets really relevant to America. The US military operates on what's called the high-low model. High-tech, expensive weapons for the big fights. Lower-cost systems for everything else. The problem? The low-cost threats have gotten so cheap that even the cheap American responses are wildly more expensive. Here's a real example from right now. Iran's Shahed 136 drone costs between $20,000 and $50,000 to produce. The US intercepts it with a Patriot missile, which costs $4 million. Each. Shot. So Iran fires 100 drones. The US fires 100 Patriot missiles. Iran spends maybe $5 million. The US spends $400 million. Do that enough times and America doesn't just lose money, it runs out of interceptors. US officials, speaking anonymously in early 2026, told NPR they were already concerned about running out of interceptor missiles before Iran runs out of cheap drones. Read that again. The most well-funded military in human history is worried about running out of ammunition, not because of a massive conventional war talk, but because of a math problem. And it's not just Iran. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, a non-state actor, a militia operating in one of the poorest countries on Earth, have been launching cheap drones at commercial shipping in the Red Sea since 2023. The US Navy has been deploying billion-dollar destroyers to shoot them down. One US destroyer deployment costs more than the entire Houthi drone program for a year. The cost imbalance is so severe it's almost comedic, if the stakes weren't so serious. And if you think that's just a problem for commercial shipping, here's what happened on American soil. In March 2024, unidentified drones flew over Langley Air Force Base, home of the F-22 Raptor, America's most advanced fighter jet, for 17 consecutive days. The Air Force's response? They moved the F-22s to another base. The world's most expensive fighter jet retreating from a drone. Here's the deeper problem, and it's one that goes beyond tactics. America's military is the product of decades of institutional thinking built around one specific kind of conflict. A peer versus peer conventional war against the Soviet Union. Big armies clashing in Europe. Naval fleets battling for ocean control. Strategic bombers and nuclear deterrence. That world never materialized. And when real wars came, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, the US military kept showing up with the wrong toolkit. The F-35 fighter jet program has cost the US over $400 billion in development alone. It's the most expensive weapons program in human history, but it cannot stop a $400 FPV drone. The US military's procurement system, the way it buys weapons, takes years, sometimes decades, to develop and deploy a new system. By the time a counter-drone solution moves through Congress, gets a budget, goes through the acquisition process, survives testing, and reaches the field, the threat has already evolved 3 times. Ukraine ships a drone update, new frequency, new targeting, new evasion pattern, adding AI targeting modules for $70 that boost strike accuracy from 20% to 80% in 72 hours. The Pentagon's fastest procurement pathway takes 18 months. On a good day, with a congressional tailwind, that gap, right there, that's where wars are lost before they start. Meet a guy named Palmer Luckey. He's 33. He founded Oculus VR. Facebook bought it for $2 billion. Now he builds autonomous drone weapons conceptualized in his garage, and he's already selling them to the US military faster than Lockheed Martin can schedule a meeting. One guy, a garage, outpacing $1 trillion defense system. And while America debates, China is moving. Everything we've talked about becomes exponentially more serious when you factor in China. China is home to DJI, the world's largest manufacturer of consumer drones, which have been adapted for warfare across every conflict zone on Earth. But beyond DJI, China's military is developing what may be the most dangerous weapon system in human history: autonomous AI drone swarms. We're not talking about drones controlled by operators. We're talking about swarms of drones that think, coordinate, and kill on their own, without any human in the loop. A senior PLA Air Force colonel described recent tests as a very important step toward true swarm capabilities. What does that mean in practice? Here's what a Chinese drone swarm actually looks like in a simulation. 500 drones launch from a ship. You can't jam them. They don't need GPS. You can't shoot them all down. There are too many. The first wave hits your radar. The second hits your missiles. The third hits whatever's left. The entire sequence takes 4 minutes. The USS Gerald Ford, $13 billion, is gone in 4 minutes. This isn't science fiction. The PLA has already tested this, and the Pentagon has already wargamed it. They have run simulations of a Chinese conflict over Taiwan. The results are not public, but the people who've seen them don't look comfortable when they talk about it. And here's the nightmare scenario. China's drone swarms don't have to win a direct military confrontation to win. All they have to do is make the cost of fighting too high. If the US has to fire a $4 million missile for every $20,000 drone in a swarm of 10,000, the math ends the war before a single soldier sets foot on a beach. So let's bring this back to the original question. Why does America keep struggling in modern conflicts? It's not because American soldiers aren't brave. They are. It's not because American technology isn't advanced. It is. It's because America built the greatest military in history for a type of war that no longer exists. And the world figured out that the fastest way to beat that military isn't to match it. It's to undercut it. Build weapons so cheap that defending against them becomes economically unsustainable. Fight in ways that turn America's greatest strength, its massive investment in expensive, advanced systems, into its greatest vulnerability. The numbers tell the story starkly. In the number of conflicts that result in decisive military victories, the share has dropped from 49% in the 1970s to just 9% in the 2010s. War is being won less and less on the traditional battlefield. And America's trillion-dollar military, the one designed for a different era of warfare, is being slowly, quietly, mathematically outmaneuvered by enemies spending a fraction of the cost. The question was never whether America could build better weapons. It always could. The question is whether it can move fast enough. The clock, for the first time in a very long time, is not on America's side. Here's the truth. America has 2 years, maybe 3, before China's autonomous swarms make this conversation irrelevant. Either the Pentagon figures out asymmetric warfare, or the next superpower won't be defeated in a battle. It'll just go bankrupt defending against one. Which do you think happens first? Drop it in the comments? Because the people who've seen the classified simulations, they're not sleeping well. And after making this video, neither am I.